Larry Lawrence Grobel is the author of more than 20 books, including Conversations with Capote and Talking with Michener. He has been a freelance writer for more than 40 years, having written for the New York Times, Rolling Stone, Entertainment Weekly, and Movieline. He is a renowned interviewer and has written numerous iconic Playboy magazine interviews. I'm here to talk to him today about his comprehensive and I don't say that often, superb book called The Art of the Interview, published in 2004, and what I would call its companion volume, even though it was written several years earlier, called Endangered Species. Writers talk about their craft, their vision, their lives. And in the foreword, I'm getting to you, Larry, okay? And in the foreword, Robert Town calls him prepared, adaptable, and graced with the intelligence needed to shoot the breeze and elicit intriguing responses. Larry, welcome to the Bibliophile.
Well, glad to be here at last.
To start with, let's go with a quote from Aristotle. And spoiler alert, I want to end with one as well. All men desire by nature to know, and they know and they learn by reading, researching, talking to people, questioning them, and listening. If you want people to listen to you, the challenge is to make it interesting. I'm almost finished here, Larry. You've said in your book about the process of interviewing, you do all the research you can, you look for areas of interest, you aim for originality, you write down questions and topics, you try to keep your questions concise and to the point, and you listen and remember always that you're in charge, and that if you lead, your subject will follow. So if you want, after all of that preparation, to get people to actually listen to what you're saying, the challenge is to make it interesting. So how do you make it interesting, Larry?
It really boils down to one word to me. The word really is preparation. Because without preparation, you're really winging it. Now, there are people who can do it that way. Larry King has always claimed that he never prepared, that he just went into it. Mark Maron, who does these wonderful podcasts, told me, you must really hate, I did his show, but he said, you must hate me, he says, because you've done all this research, you've done it, you go into such depth, and I sit here and talk, to somebody just like winging it, and I'm very popular in what happened to the interviews, in print,
Yeah.
I said, I don't hate you at all. I said, you figured out a way to do this and take it to the level that you've taken it.
Well, he's interesting, obviously. So that's my question. What makes him and what makes an interview interesting to people who listen to it?
Well, what makes it interesting to me is that you get people to talk about things they have never, that you don't know about them. If you go into an interview with anybody, Joyce Carol Oates or Marlon Brando or Truman Capote or Al Pacino, and you say, gee, I know about this. I heard, I know he did this. I know he did that. And you start asking questions that are sort of tell me about those things. You're not learning that much. You've already seen the movie. You've got an idea.
Yeah.
But when you get to a place where, with Pacino, for example, I interviewed him so many different times, and I always brought up The Godfather. I always brought up Michael Corleone because he did 3 of them, but he changed his own view of what he did and how he saw that character over the years. So I thought that made that interesting to me because I could take it further and further. My attempt has always been to go as far as I can go with somebody and then even a step further, if I can, without getting thrown out or punched as I did with Bobby Knight.
My question would have been, why is Godfather Part 3 so god-awful?
Yeah, well, he talks about that. I mean, number one, George Hamilton wasn't supposed to play that part, but they couldn't get Robert Duvall. and it was Duvall who wanted as much money as Pacino. But the point is that he should have taken the $3 million and he held out for the $5 million or whatever it was, and that really hurt it. But the other part was Sofia Coppola. Winona Ryder was going to be Al's daughter. Al loved Winona Ryder as an actress. He put her into Looking for Richard, in a scene from
Richard III. Yeah.
So he was expecting that, and she pulled out at the last minute, and so Coppola brings in Sofia Coppola. Not the quality of an actress as Winona would have been, and the same with Hamilton, who I know George Hamilton. I play cards with him. I love him a lot, but he's certainly not the consigliere that Duvall was. And the third, I'll give you another answer. His haircut. That ridiculous cut that he made. I'm trying to remember. I think it was Diane Keaton who said, "Do not do that," and he did it anyway. But whatever it was, those things hurt.
Okay.
What can you say?
We're really trying to get at the, and I'm going to hammer this. I'm going to hammer this pretty well the whole interview long.
That's okay.
How do we get an interesting interview from an author, particularly? You define good interviews as, and we're talking print here, as conversations with the boring parts edited out. But you also say that good interviews involve many skills. I'm just going to read this out. One must be able to converse like a talk show host, think like a writer, understand subtext like a psychiatrist, have an ear like a musician, be able to select the best parts like a book editor, and know how to piece it together dramatically like a playwright. That's multitasking.
It is, isn't it? But that's what a good interviewer does, I think. The more, I was asked to write a book about interviewing after my Capote book came out. New American Library offered me some money to do it. And I remember talking to James Michener, and I said, well, first of all, I didn't think the money was enough. Second of all, I didn't really think I could write a book about it. I didn't think, I'd never thought in terms of writing a book about interviewing. I read The Craft of Interviewing by James Brady. I knew that book, but, I just didn't know if I could do this. Years went by from that, 20, 30 years, and suddenly I realized I had so much information. I had so much thought about what the nature of an interview is. I was teaching it at UCLA, so I had to develop a course on it.
Yeah.
And I realized that there's so much more. That when you actually sit down, when I go into a class, and the first class I do is I take 2,000 pages, manuscript pages, of my interview with Al Pacino. And that was just the first interview for Playboy. But it lasted for months and months. And I put it down, and then I have 140 pages, which is what I edited that down to. And I have the index that I made on yellow paper that's 12 pages long, single space thing. Then I show the galleys of the actual interview that Playboy sends me back, and I show that to be like 80 pages of manuscript from that. And that's the process.
What you say is that good interviews are conversation with the boring parts edited out. Okay, so what did you leave in, and why did you leave it in?
What I leave in is what interests me. It's my own ear. I've read a lot, so I have a sensibility. I may be right, I may be wrong in what I leave out.
Yeah.
I think I'm pretty good at it because Playboy once hired me to edit other people's interviews that they weren't going to use.
Yeah.
Tom Snyder comes to mind. You remember the talk show host Tom Snyder?
I do, yeah.
Somebody interviewed Tom Snyder, and the kid came back, and my editor at the time, Barry Goldstein, called me up and said, they can't use it. It's not very good. He says, would you mind taking a look at it?
Okay.
So I looked at it, and I said, it's very boring. Send me the rest of it. So he sends me all the outtakes. The whole interview was in the outtakes. I found it, right? So I redid some of it. Barry said, gee whiz, I got to pay you for this, because, well, that sort of showed me that I really had an understanding of what's good, what's bad. That I can't teach you.
I was just about to say, you said the word sensibility. You can't teach that, but I think like what I'm getting from you, Larry, and I completely concur with it, is that whatever interests and fascinates you, you hope that your readers or listeners will agree with you. An interview...
Well, you know what? Many times when I've been with somebody, like Al Pacino, when I finished with him, he said, You can't be finished with me. We got to keep talking. He said, he said, this is like my shrink, and he's paying a guy for to talk to him, but he wanted to keep going even after I thought we had enough.
Yeah.
So you realize, with me, I realized fairly early on that it is psychological, an interview. You are trying to probe a person. You are trying to get them to get emotional. Sometimes to cry, sometimes to talk about things. But a good interview is going to talk about things that are meaningful to the person.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's very deep. Sometimes you got to go places that they don't want to go to, but that if you uncover, you will make them more interesting.
It can be a very intense experience, an exhausting experience, I've found.
Oh, yeah. I spent 9 months with Barbara Streisand talking about being exhausting.
God.
That was like a incredible experience. But when I say you have to have an ear like a musician, to me, that's the editing part of it. Sometimes when you're talking to somebody, actually, though, you have to hear what they're saying while you're thinking about your next question or where you may want to move it, depending on your time.
Yeah.
If you only have a few hours with somebody or 15 minutes with somebody, you can't just futz around.
We've sort of danced around it a bit, but there's really three kinds of interviews. There's the print interview, which you're a master at. There's the audio, which we're involved in right now, radio and podcasts, and there's TV. So we should probably identify the differences and also the tricks, or whatever you want to call them, of producing an interesting author interview in each one of these mediums.
All right. I think the difference for me. An author interview as an audio interview would be fascinating just to hear their voices, because I've already read their work. I have a James Joyce recording, Finnegan's Wake or something, or a piece from Ulysses.
You can get it on YouTube, yeah.
I have one of Hemingway too, but they both high voices. That may not be their real sound, because that was the old days, and you didn't have audio that great, so at that time.
Yeah.
But just the idea that I could hear the way he pronounces certain words as I follow it in the book. I'll find the passage and I'll follow it, and I go, Anna Livia.
It's an audio experience. Ulysses is an audio experience. Well, both of them. It's really very much that musical. Yeah.
And if there is a 5-record recording of it, which I have. He's on one of it, but you have these Irish actors and actresses who are reading it, and it is musical. You see how beautiful that is, his writing. But so to me, the audio is, I won't fault it if it's not as in depth, if it doesn't challenge me as much as if when I read it.
Yeah.
When I'm reading an interview with Saul Bellow or an interview with Norman Mailer, I want to get to a place with it that I'll underline. It's like, oh, that's a clever remark. Now, I was able, with a cable TV interview with Capote and with Alex Haley and with Norman Mailer, I think I succeeded, because I showed them on camera talking about certain things. With Norman Mailer, when I asked him about stabbing his wife, and he says, why do you bring that up? And I said, well, because you wrote a poem about it. You said, as long as you use the knife.
Yeah.
And he corrected me. He said, a knife, or vice versa. He says, so he put his finger on his collar and he, opened it a little bit. And I saw, visually, you saw how uncomfortable he was. You saw how he put his arm up.
Let me just jump in here. It's an important point. With an author interview, I typically focus on the work. I'm not interested in necessarily, unless it sheds light, and it typically would, but it's the work itself that's worth spending time with, and that the author feels comfortable with, rather than exposing the fact that they may have had an affair, or they may have stabbed someone or shot someone or done something stupid. That to me, okay, it's emotional, which is what you want, I suppose, in terms of being interesting, but is it helping listeners to understand that work better?
Well, yes, and because you have an hour and a half, you should be focusing on the work, and it's an author's interview.
Yeah.
So if you can talk to me, you want to focus on interviewing, or you want to focus on, if you want to talk to me about short stories, I'm happy because I wrote a few, or that kind of
couple of novels too.
Where I've always come from, though, is from a very broad stage. I want to know what makes you tick. I was interviewed for the J.D. Salinger movie documentary that this guy Shane Salerno did. And he called me up and he said, he wants to come put me on camera. And I said, why would you want to talk to me? I said, I've never met J.D. Salinger. I never interviewed him. He said, well, you're known as a premier interviewer in this country, and I would like to know what you would ask him if you had a chance.
Yeah.
So I said, okay. So when I go on camera and we start talking about what things I would or wouldn't ask him, I'm asking him from two different places. As a university professor of English who might want to know about Cole Holden Caulfield and Seymour in a little bit different or a little bit deeper way, or as a person who is curious about the fact that he stopped writing and why, and it's a different area. And so I'm always interested in the two areas. Why Norman Mailer, stabbed his wife? Why was I interested in that? Because he had never talked about it. He always refused everybody who ever asked him that answer.
Yeah, so it's a challenge.
It's a challenge. Can I get you to tell me something that you haven't talked about?
Well, it's also original, which is what you want. It's something that's never been heard before or read before.
But let me contradict you about something. I listened to your interview with the woman who wrote A Girl is a Half-Formed Thing.
Yeah.
Why did I listen to that? Because I got the book. Why did I get the book? Because I had read that it was a Joycean kind of thing and blah, blah, blah. So I'm a big Joycean person. I went and got the book, and I've started reading it a few times. I haven't finished it. It's a difficult book.
Yeah.
But I wanted to know more about her writing. I wanted to know more about her process, and you didn't do that. It was a difficult book to begin with, but you went into her life and where she was coming from and how she did stuff, and how old she is. And
wait a minute. I was interested in one of the key things about that book is that it took so long to get published, and when it did, there was a lot of fanfare.
Right. But I'm saying to myself, lots of books take a long time to get published.
Yeah.
That's just standard. It's the same.
So Larry, you weren't interested in my interview. Is that what you're saying?
I was interested, waiting to hear certain things that I was hoping you would ask.
Okay, so what did you want to hear? What specifically?
I wanted to hear more about. I wanted about the style. I wanted her to talk more about Joyce, because she brings it up. She says, sort of the elephant in the room is Joyce. I wanted her to talk about Beckett. She's Irish. Where she's coming from. I would like to know how she developed, the style she developed. Was William Faulkner's book an influence on her? The Sound and the Fury. It's an original book. It's a very original book, but it has precedence. So I was looking for a little bit more about that. That's
she bridles a bit at that. She doesn't like the comparison necessarily, but still, it's there. It's obvious. You have to talk about
bridle. Tell me why you bridle. Tell me why that upsets you.
Okay.
Like calling a woman writer. They don't like that. But it's always good to provoke them. You know what I mean? I have no problem provoking. Even if I may know the answers to 3/4 of the questions I ask, but I still will go there because I don't know where else it may lead to.
So why are you interested in learning from her about Beckett and her style and that sort of thing? Why does that interest you?
Well, because writers interest me. I'm always interested in where they coming from. When you're writing a difficult idea, I've written a book in the style of J.P. Donlevy as I was learning to find my own voice. But, I find fascinating the writers who take leaps.
Basically, where do you go from Joyce?
Well, Donlevy took one section of Joyce, using the first and third person in the same paragraph, let's say about the same person, and he developed that as his book, But when you are developing your voice and your character, how risky is it? How difficult is it? It took her 9 years to publish, but did it take her 6 weeks to write it, or 6 months? I remember she talked about it. It wasn't as long as I thought it might have been. But when you get inspired as a writer, I'm listening to that stuff. You know what I mean?
Because what? So you can learn from it? Something that you can apply?
That's my curiosity. I like to know that Hemingway, used to stand up and type his dialogue and sit down and write his description.
I saw the place he did that in Cuba. I don't know if you've been there, but
I haven't. I've seen pictures with Donlevy, with Michener. Whenever I'm in with a writer, I always say, "Can I see your study? I want to see the machine you're using." Wherever Michener went, he would go and buy a door from a lumber yard that was flat, and then he would get 2 filing cabinets of 2 drawers each, put the drawer on top of the cabinets, and that was his desk. Wherever he went, he had.
Why is that interesting? To me,
Typewriter.
I couldn't care less if he had a door that he writes on.
See, that's the difference between you and I. Not that I'm wrong or you're wrong or I'm right or you're right. But if I'm editing it, I will include that stuff. If you're editing it, you will exclude that stuff. The question then is, how interesting is it?
Yeah, exactly.
Now, that's where we get back to what's the interest. Now, you have to tell me what your audience is. Is it 100,000, 200,000, or 50? And my audience, which was, let's say, Playboy at the time, 7 million to 20 million.
You've got a much broader audience, yeah.
So it's not. There's no right or wrong here.
No, but you're right, though. I mean, for example, the fact that Michener used these doors as desks, I mean, that's good cocktail party fodder.
It is, yes. But it's also, how does a man work? Does he handwrite? Does he write on a typewriter? Does he use a computer? It's different. Jack Kerouac was probably the first computer writer who didn't have a computer. He took a roll of paper,
long roll of paper, yeah,
and rolled it.
On the typewriter, yeah.
When you wrote with a typewriter, you had an 8.5 by 11 page thing. Your thoughts would sometimes come to a close when you get to the bottom of the page at a period, and you go to the next. Now on a computer, you never get to that bottom of the page, so your thought might go a little bit longer. It's interesting. It's just the way our minds work and with the tools we use.
Again, I don't find the fact, I mean, first of all, I don't think he's a great writer like others do, but the fact that he used to write on toilet paper, is that interesting? It's cocktail party fodder. Is it really interesting? But then again, what is interesting? That's what I'm getting at.
But that leads to the nature of stream of consciousness, the nature of the way the mind works. Are you just going to vomit everything out that comes out, which is what Kerouac was doing in a way? His mind was working, and we were getting to see a mind at work.
True.
Or is it very carefully edited? Asimov never cared about how he wrote. He was not a very good writer.
Right.
He wrote prolifically, and his editors took the books and made them into books. Tom Wolfe, so the same thing, Thomas Wolfe. Look Homeward Angel. All these books were twice as long as they were, and he just would bring them in and they edited it down to shape. Now, some writers never let you touch anything. Capote was very exact about how he wrote.
He polished and polished.
Yeah. What you're basically saying is the finished product is what interests you. You're interested in talking about the book and about what what are the ideas that are in that book.
I'm interested in the art more so than the artist, and I'm also, just based on my own focus, I'm interested in the book. So how did this idea get from being in the head of the writer to the finished product and the whole process? And
that's the same thing I'm talking about. You're just phrasing it a different way. But
you're right. You're right.
You could go at me all throughout this whole time trying just to answer that interest. What's interesting? Because you're judging interest from one point of view. I'm saying it from whatever point of view I have. But part of what I see that makes an interview tick for me is my personality. Because when I'm there and I become goofy or fool around, say a joke, with Brando, when I said, what's some of your favorite movies? And he said, Ugetsu, for the Japanese movie. Yeah. And I just said to him, Who gets sued when you're rich and famous? That's all I had to do.
And he cracked up, yeah.
And it got to him.
You know what you're talking about is what I think is probably one of the most important aspects of a good, successful interview is rapport. If you're able to get the rapport, then you're on a different plane, and you can hopefully, as you say, kind of get people to relax and be comfortable with you and trust you, so that they say things that are meaningful, which is interesting.
But then on the other hand, with Bobby Knight, there was no rapport between Knight and I. He hated journalists. He just hated us.
Yeah.
And I was coming in to ask him the toughest of all questions. But it was one of the most startling interviews that I've ever put out, and it got some of the most startling results. There were 2 interviews in my life. I became part of that the
story.
Conversation.
Yeah.
And that was Bobby Knight and Jesse Ventura when he was governor. But I didn't know that I would be on the radio with every sports talk show host in the country, in Cleveland, in Florida.
Well, didn't he tried to grab the stuff out of your hands and like the actual tapes, right? So it was
He and I fought, but it was all the questions I had. Half of them were very difficult questions, and I had to ask him. And he was a volatile man. He had just been fired.
Well, which is actually to your point, though. He was criticized for actually attacking some of his students and being abusive, and which is sort of the fact that he did what he did in the interview is ample evidence that this is the kind of person he is.
Exactly. And that's what you get. And that's why I even wrote in the back, I chose that interview of all the interviews I've ever done as the full interview to show in the Art of the Interview book.
Yeah.
And I prefaced with a prologue said, "On the road with the angriest man in America."
Yeah, right.
Because that really was what happened. Yeah. I didn't even realize that he had punched me until I got home. And I flew home, and I had to call the doctor because I had tremendous pain in my ribs. And I had a hernia operation a few weeks early, and I just wanted to know if that was a possible result. And he said, "No, somebody punched you in the ribs." And I realized that's what happened with Knight. When we were fighting in the car. The emotion was so much I didn't feel it until I got home and had the bruise.
So remind me not to interview coaches and athletes and that sort of thing.
Only that one.
You make an interesting point. Again, it's not really directly on message in terms of author interviews, but I like what you say here. You say that the key to the art of surviving in the real world involves the skills that an interviewer needs: talking, listening, thinking, analyzing, selecting, and editing segments. These are skills that can be applied to real life. And I guess that's the course that you taught. Is that correct?
Yeah. One of the things I did with students was to teach them how to prepare for an interview themselves, for a job interview.
Yeah.
And what I basically was telling them is, first of all, make sure that you are prepared as if it was an interview you were giving. So you study about the subject that you want to get a job at. You learn, you read their reports. You find out as much as you can. And then when they're starting to talk to you and question you, have questions that you want to ask them. You'll be surprised at how they respond. And it works. I know it works because so many of them would come back, tell me I got the job, and they would thank me. I said they said they never saw anybody so prepared.
Yeah.
That was the whole thing. It's like there are things about learning about the interview process and also how to listen and also when to cut in and when not to. There are ways that the interview itself, done correctly, can be life-informing and help you, especially these days, when time. I think it's a really hard time for young people right now. How do they find jobs? Where are they going to go?
One of the things that I like particularly about that is that you follow it up with one of the reasons that one of your interview candidates was so happy to divulge interesting information is that they said that they have a feeling that you really want to know and that you need to convey this feeling of it's enthusiasm, but it's also sort of focused interest and curiosity, which I think speaks to Aristotle too, which is this whole idea of we really do want to know.
Well, when I think what you're referring to there is my time with Warren Beatty.
Mm-hmm.
And when I said to Warren Beatty, "What's it like to be Warren Beatty?" That was a stupid question in a way, right? I mean, what's it like to be anybody?
Yeah.
But Warren Beatty had a certain mystique about him. They gave interviews. Every girl I've ever met who knew him, who had slept with him, was still his friend, said he was the best. Nobody had anything negative to say about Warren. He was a real Lothario. I mean, he was like him and Ryan O'Neal were the two who were out there just fooling around with every woman you could possibly get. And I said to him, and I've heard stories about him at the Playboy Mansion. There were so many things out there.
Yeah.
I said, "What is it like?" And I looked at him, and I was just sort of smiling. I said, "What's it like to be you?" And he looked at me and says, "People are always asking me that, but I have a feeling you really want to know." And I did.
Well, so that you can use it in your own life.
Well, hopefully I can learn something. I don't know what he learned.
Right.
And I watched this guy on the phone. I watched how he handled himself. He was an interesting man. Because I prepare so much, I do get curious about the person I'm going to talk to.
For sure.
And I always find that important. I mean, even when I was with Freddie Prinze Jr., and we go into his house, and we go up to his bedroom. He wanted to talk in the bedroom. So we're in this bedroom, and it's a large room, and I look at all the shelves, and they're empty. And I go, Freddie, I said, where are your books?
Yeah.
And he said, I don't have books. I don't read. I said, you don't have books? Well, I said, I collect first editions. He says, what's that? Didn't know, first editions. So now I'm dealing with somebody that's on a very different level than I am in a certain way, but yet he's got the Mercedes outside. He's got the big house, and he's doing okay.
Yeah.
So let me get to where he's at. How did he get to where he's at? So I said, well, what do you... And he started talking about comic books. He collected comic books. I said, oh, then I got into that. First editions of comic books. He understood that.
Yeah.
And then what he paid for it. And that... Now tell me when you started reading those comic books when you were a kid. And then we get to where he,
we get the juice. That's where the juice is. That's where the passion is, right?
Yeah, exactly. So you have to find what people's interest is, what they collect, what they like. If you're looking at that broad of an interest, you don't look for that with an author necessarily, and I perfectly understand it, because if you're talking to Cormac McCarthy and he hasn't talked to many people, or Don DeLillo, let me talk about White Noise. Let me talk about All the Pretty Horses. Let me talk about, how you felt about the movie made of this thing or that thing. And, there's a lot of things that you want to talk about to an author. It's curious with Truman Capote is because I thought I had the rest of my life and his life to talk to him. He agreed to let me talk. And I thought, oh, man. So we did the gossip part. We got all that stuff. But I was looking...
That's all he is, though. That's all he is. He's a fabulous writer about rich people and gossip. That's what he's wonderful at.
Look, he was also really good with the Grass Harp and his short pieces, his early work. He was a marvelous writer.
He was.
If you look at just the writing itself, he only wrote 6 or 8 books. But as a writer, he was, I thought, a very strong, good writer.
As a person, though, he came across...
Delightful.
Well... Okay, but again, his media persona was like he had this sort of squeaky little baby whale voice, and he was like, it seemed like he was a big backstabber, and he lied all the time. Like, who wants that person as a friend?
All right, but here's the thing. When I was with him, I never thought he lied. Okay. I really believed what he was telling me, and he was saying things, and and if you really look at my book, I mean, his remarks, Jacqueline Suzanne looked like a truck driver or something, whatever he would say, those are just his perceptions. I mean, what he said about Joyce Carol Oates, who's a friend of mine, it was devastating, that she would, go out.
Well, so in other words, you're saying he's being blunt and very honest.
He can be, yes. And tremendously entertaining. I mean, he was aware of being an entertainer.
Hugely, yeah.
So I looked forward to seeing Truman. I mean, I said, well, I'm going to spend 5 hours with Truman Capote.
Larry, it doesn't get much better than that. I mean, in terms of why are you doing what you're doing? You get to hang out and have a blast with one of the great writers of the century. This is a payback for what you're doing, or payoff anyway.
I mean, look, Saul Bellow. I tried to get Saul Bellow for years. Playboy said, no. It wasn't Playboy material. Yeah. And I said, look, this guy's the greatest writer alive right now. He's won the Nobel Prize. Let me... Finally, they said okay, because I wouldn't leave him alone. They finally said okay. And Bellow, at first, says he's sick and he's working on something. His secretary writes me, so so I said, can I write you back? Try again in 6 months. I tried again in 6 months. No, he still didn't want to do it. I tried again another time. No, Finally, Bellow agreed.
Well, what did you do? What did you say that got him to agree?
I think it was my persistence.
Just persistence.
Strictly just saying, I didn't say anything about what I want to talk about or any of that stuff with him. I just said, I'd done some pretty good interviews so he could see my work, but I'm serious. Basically, I said I'm a serious person, and you're a writer who deserves to be in that magazine, basically. Yeah. So what happened is, by the time he agreed to let me come, I told Playboy, and they said no, they don't want him anymore.
Jeez.
I couldn't believe that.
Yeah.
So suddenly I'm going, you say that, what's the perks of my work? Yeah, going to see Saul Bellow on someone else's dime is a perk of the work.
I mean, it's more than a perk, isn't it? It's like, it's one of the whole reasons, the basis.
Exactly. I told Arthur Kretschmer, who was the executive editor of Playboy, I wrote him a note, and I said, I do not feel right telling Saul Bellow that Playboy no longer wants him. I said, I think that's something that it should come from you.
Yeah.
Just for his stature, he should have it from you. And of course, Arthur Kretschmer said, "Oh, go ahead and do it." He didn't want to do it, so he gave me the go. So that's how I got to do Saul Bellow.
Okay. What about
Mariana Fallaci? Oh, I love her.
Yeah, but what about her great? I think she interviewed Hitchcock. She interviewed Hitchcock, and you have it in the book, where at the very end she says something like, well, she calls him quite a creep.
A mean, despicable little man or something like that. She really laid into him. But here's the thing. That's one of the reasons why Hitchcock... See, they said to Hitchcock, the guy named, I think it was David Freeman, was in the room. He was a writer for one of Hitchcock's last projects.
Yeah.
And then my name was brought up. They said, oh, yeah, this guy, Larry Grobel's coming to interview Hitch. And he said, are you sure you want to do that? And that was what the conversation was. Are you sure you know he's going to go into places, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Well, okay, there's nothing I can do about that. But I always feel I'm fair. I always feel that I've never gone out. I mean, De Niro hated the interview I did with him. But it was an honest interview, and I kept telling him.
I'm not impressed with him as a person. Actor, yes.
I am more now that he's come out.
That's true, yeah. All he does is swear his head off.
He does, but well, let's put it this way. He's still, I don't care about his latest movies or something, but he's a great actor.
Yeah, as I say, for sure he is. And the same with Pacino.
So you give him the leeway that you give Pavarotti for no matter what he does, I mean, it was like he was Pavarotti.
Well, that's right. You separate the art from the artist.
Yeah. And that's, because normally the person is usually not so great,
Yeah, exactly. There's lots of asshole artists around.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I think I'm too nice. That's why I'm not a really great writer.
Well, listen, you produced a really, really good book, The Art of the Interview. Highly recommend it. Now that we've got Oriana Fallaci in our sights, I just want to preface the next question with a short quote from her. I do not feel myself to be, nor will I ever succeed in feeling like a cold recorder of what I see and hear. On every professional experience, I leave shreds of my heart and soul.
Yeah,
now,
I agree with that.
Okay, now the question is, and it seems to be a fairly important one as far as interviewing goes, and that is, do you? I mean, I know what your answer is going to be, but I think there's a division. Okay, I tend to like to confront, not argue, but confront diplomatically and disagree with people that I interview if I can. Now, John Sawatsky, who's a great interviewing guru and a fellow Canadian, completely disagrees with me. It's like the old proverb, are you the wind trying to get the man's coat off, or are you the sun?
Yeah, well, I would say I'm the wind.
Me too.
I definitely try to reveal as much as possible. I've had these discussions. I have a guy who wants me to do a podcast with him. He has a show that reaches 5 million people, he says, and whatever. And it's about the creative life. And he says, I try to always ask the most positive things. I try to create the sun. And I think that's great, and there's no problem with that. I said, but I'm not the guy I'm not going to fawn, I'm not going to be Mike Pence to Donald Trump. I just can't do that. So my feeling is, let the chips fall where they may. Let's go as far as we can with something. Let's go as deep as we can with something. Let me see who you are. That's my challenge.
Yeah.
Strictly.
I guess.
And I miss doing it. I haven't been doing long, in-depth interviews. I've been writing. Last number of years, I've written like 28 books, and I'm self-publishing a great deal of them. Why? Because I'm writing exactly what I want to write.
Well, that's
I'm
good.
at the stage in my life where I'm doing what I want, and I'm happy doing it. And if no one ever reads my work, it's okay. I wrote a book that I think is as good as The Art of the Interview, which is You Talking to Me.
Yeah, that's a memoir, right?
No, that's You Show Me Yours. That's a memoir.
Oh, yes.
You Talking to Me is this one. On the back, I listed all the names of every person that I'm writing about. And what I thought was, this is what Mark Maron kept asking me. It's like you asking me what makes something interesting. Maron kept saying to me, what have you learned? You've done all these people. What have you learned?
Yeah.
I didn't want to talk about that to him because I was thinking about a book about that. I didn't want to give it all out.
Well, I think you were concerned that you hadn't actually thought about it, and you don't like listening to that interview because it doesn't make you look so good, right?
I don't like it, although people like it.
Yeah.
Mark Maron's brother wrote me an email saying it's my favorite interview. I said, really?
Okay, Larry. So, Larry, what have you learned?
But that's the thing. There's 120. What I did was I started thinking about the people I interviewed. So I looked at Mae West, Elliot Gould, Charlie Sheen, Goldie Hawn, my old piano teacher Ted Harris, the artists I knew growing up with, about Arthur Singer. What did I learn from Paul McCarthy, who's now a great artist? I mean, he makes $5 million on each sculpture, and I saw him when he was a performance artist, putting hot dogs in his mouth and shaving his body hair. I mean, what did I learn from him? Well, one of my great learning experiences was an insight into myself. Why? Because he told me a story. He told me a story about how he did this performance where he was in a car for 5 days. He never left the car. He ate there, he shit there, he did everything in the car. And I was fascinated by that because he was my doppelganger. He was the opposite of me. And so I brought it up. I had a bunch of these artists at my house once, and I was interviewing them all. And I brought this up, and I said, Paul, talk about that experience in the car. And he looked at me, and he says, and he didn't want to talk about it. So then he said, Larry, come in the kitchen. So I go in the kitchen with him, and he says, you know that story? I said, yeah. He says, I never did it.
Oh, no.
Never did it. I looked at him. I said, why did you tell me? He says, because I know you like stories.
Oh, dear.
And he was right. He got me.
Yeah.
And if I had written about that, and I didn't. I was going to put that into an article, and I don't think I did. I said, Paul, if I would have written about it, it would have existed. He says, yeah. No, that's part of performance art, isn't it? I mean, it was.
See, you know who he sounds like? He sounds like Andy Warhol.
In a certain way,
yeah.
But it was a very Zen-like moment for me,
yeah.
And so I appreciated that, and I the same thing with Elliot Gould saying to me when I first met him, and we weren't talking. I mean, he was late for an hour, and he came in and he was stoned, and he wants to put on Marvin Gaye. I said no. I said tape recorder will pick up the music. Let's watch TV. No, I don't want to watch TV. Let's talk. And we start talking. I say, you're from Brooklyn, aren't you? And he goes, information. I said, you used to do those Bosco commercials. He says, information. Every question I gave him was information, he would say, is the word back, my response. And I finally said to him, Elliot, maybe we should do this on another day. You don't seem to really be wanting to do this. I've been waiting here a long time, and we're not getting anywhere. And he looked at me, he says, we're talking, man. We're talking, aren't we? And I realized what he was saying to me was, go deeper. Go, interest,
right.
Make
Don't stop
for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I always took that as like, that was my epiphany with him. That was what I learned.
Yeah.
And to go beyond.
As long as he continues to talk to you, as long as he hasn't told you to get out, then you can keep going.
He didn't say get out. I said let's get out.
Yeah.
Said, no. So there are learning experiences from Arthur Singer. I grew up watching this guy. He and Roger Tory Peterson, the two most famous bird artists of our time.
Yeah.
Both of them. Well, Peterson might still be alive. Arthur died some while ago. But I grew up with his son was my friend, and is still my friend, and does the covers for my books, by the way. But I grew up watching in the neighborhood in Jericho, Long Island, a bike ride away. I go to Paul's house, and there's Arthur, and he's got a bird, an eagle that he got from the Museum of Natural History. No one's allowed to take out any of those specimens.
Yeah.
He was. That's
Right.
how, and then he would go to Africa and just to photograph birds, and he would have adventures and stuff like that.
Mm.
But he was the most mild-mannered guy, and he smoked a pipe. And I just saw the difference between that lifestyle and my father's lifestyle, going to work, coming home tired, all that stuff.
So what'd you learn?
I was going to do a painting for my high school class or something. I did it at his house, and I was trying to get whatever brushes I should use. And Arthur said to me, "Always use the best brushes, even if you're just starting out. Use good brushes." And that was enough, because that's what I learned about tape recorders. That's what I learned about computers. Whatever equipment you have, if you're going to be a photographer, use the best.
Yeah.
If you're going to you don't get a cheap tape recorder that's going to screw you up if you're doing something. Get the most expensive one or the best rated one. That simple thing. Use good brushes was my lesson in life about quality. You're going to go eat ice cream.
That's
Why
good.
eat terrible ice cream? Spend a few more cents and get the best of it.
Very good.
That's basically the lesson I learned in life. If I get yogurt, if I get anything, if I get a good scotch.
What's the name of that book again?
You, talking to me.
We've been a bit thrown off, so I'm going to wind it back to the point where we talked about challenging other people and being challenged, and just to get back on track with the interviewing. The interviewer has to be mentally alert and ready to challenge and be challenged.
Right.
And be challenged. That's interesting.
Well, because not only am I going to challenge you about something that I know about, but you may come back at me and say, well, look at this. I mean, I watched Hannity yesterday talking to Mark Cuban. Now, I don't watch Fox too much. My wife will leave the room immediately.
Yeah.
But I find it highly amusing and to watch some of it.
I agree.
I can't believe some of the things that I'm hearing, but I'm saying the president is listening to this. He's doing things because of what they're saying to him. He's firing all these people because they're saying to do it. And so you got to pay attention. You got to pay attention to everything, not just what you say. But
totally.
Here is Hannity, asking a question about why do you want Biden? He's a bumbler, and I don't understand. And so Cuban says, Cuban makes his remarks. Hannity gives his thing. Then Hannity says, okay, I'll give you the last word. So Cuban makes a remark that's negative to Trump. Hannity jumps right back in and starts, doing his thing. I'm saying, wait, what happened to the last word there? He has to get it all the time. So I'm watching that stuff. But it's a give and take, but from Hannity's point of view, he will never knock the president. He's going to defend this guy. So it's not news anymore. It's the Trump show when you watch that thing.
Yeah.
But then
he's in for a big reward. That's all I can say.
Well, listen. It's quite interesting to me what's going on with that channel and all. But and Trump complains that it's not good enough for him now.
That's right. Yeah. Well, you know what? He's positioning himself to set up his own TV network.
That's what he was going to do originally.
That's right. That's what he wanted to do. That's right.
He never thought he'd be president.
It's going to happen. It's going to happen.
I don't understand. See, my thing is, and I just wrote something on Facebook about this. I said, I don't understand why anybody would want to be president in 2020.
Yeah.
What you got? I mean, it was terrible when Obama came in. The economy was terrible, but this you got to deal with. It's going to be coming back. You're going to deal with more deaths. You're going to do. It's a horrible time to be a president.
It is. Yeah.
Especially if you're not a good leader.
Yeah.
Why not just you have country clubs? You have all the money in the world.
Yeah.
You have all the despots around the world.
No, but you know what? He can't.
Israel.
There's no way you can get more attention than he's getting now. That's the thing. It's like peak attention. He if he steps down,
he feeds on it. No, but he'll still have it.
He'll have it, but you're right. He will.
He's always had it.
Okay, we've got to go off Trump. Off Trump. No more Trump. Sorry. No more Trump.
Sorry.
No more Trump.
Sorry.
Sorry, let's get back to the boring work of interviewers. The interview is like a massage, working out the knots. It's like a dance where the subject hopefully follows your lead.
Right.
Like when I wanted us to stop talking about Trump.
Yeah,
I appreciate.
You are redirecting me. And I always ask people who interview me to do that, by the way, because I have a tendency to just talk. And if you allow me to talk, I'll go in 100 different directions, and I'm having a good time. But it's not necessarily what you need or what you want. So I always preface it by saying, well, with you, I preface it by saying, I'll talk as long as you want. So
yeah, I like that. Appreciate that.
In other words, you'll edit it down to what you need anyway, and then you'll have whatever you might need, hopefully. But usually, when someone's on a time limit, it's difficult. So that's why I say it's part of the training. Really, is to how to steer a conversation back and how to know when to let it go.
Yep.
You know, let it go in a new direction. Let it happen that way because this is more interesting than where I was going to go with it. You don't know. So, that's the listening part.
Well, that's the wonderful thing about a conversation, I think, and that's what Montaigne said about conversations. The reason that they're so wonderful is that you really don't know where they're going to end up.
Right. You don't know if we're going to have a good conversation or bad. You don't know if we're going to end up hanging up on each other or just, saying, hey, let's have a beer next time you're in town. You don't know that, Yeah. I never knew that I would have a 35-year friendship with Al Pacino that was like brothers. Yeah. I never knew that was going to happen. When I first went in, I was nervous as hell, but then I saw he was more nervous than I was, so I said he calmed me down. So it's just, you just don't know. I develop relationships with people like Kim Basinger or Dolly Parton or Goldie Hawn, and then I do something that they don't like and I lose their relationship, or just something occurs and I said, well, that wasn't a relationship to begin with. It was a lesson. These people are not your friends, basically.
Yep. Now I'm on Montaigne right now, so I want to just lay a quick little thing on Montaigne, even though Goldie Hawn's probably way more interesting, but. Especially that piece that you did on her about Al Cap and him exposing himself to her. But I have to read the book to get the story, okay?
Okay.
I was triggered by something, and so basically I wanted to just get on the record this quote. The study of books is a languid and feeble process that gives no heat, whereas conversation teaches and exercises us at the same time. If we talk with a man of strong mind and a tough jouster, he presses on my flanks, he pricks me right and left, his ideas stimulate mine, rivalry, vanity, and the struggle urge me on and raise me above myself, and agreement is an altogether tiresome constituent of conversation.
Oh, I would use that quote in my book if I did another version of it. It's an excellent quote. Yeah. No, I don't know if I agree about the study of books give me no heat. I don't know if I would agree with that part of it, but I know what he's saying because you have a dialogue in your head when you read a book, basically. A book is aimed at one person at a time. But a conversation is a challenge because someone's always going to have an opinion. And an opinion may be something you agree or disagree with. If you agree with everything, it's no fun. After a while, it's like, okay, we don't have to talk.
My position, and yours too, is that it's more interesting when there's disagreement.
Yeah, absolutely. But honest disagreement. I do try to provoke. There's no doubt about it in my life. I've done that. But, when you're with people who've been interviewed a long time, they know what you're doing. They'll point it out. Brando was very good at always pointing out. He would say, I can always tell when you're asking the money question. He says, because your leg will shake or your voice will go up or your timbre. He was observant. Yeah. And I didn't doubt that that's what I would do when I get to a place. Sometimes, you try very hard to keep everything on the same key, especially when you're getting deeper into something that you really want to get to. Yeah. But I guess that's the art thing. I remember Capote's remark about gossip being a form of art.
Okay. I want to get on to Ira Glass. And this is talking about radio and audio. You quote him as saying that he doesn't want his his guests to go on for more than 45 seconds because I guess it's not interesting. Whereas you quote David Issei as saying that he goes for as long as 7 or 8 minutes, just so long as it's interesting. I just wonder if you have any kind of rule in that regard.
No, because unless I'm doing it for the television one, that's something else.
I mean, for radio or TV.
I think you do want to keep the remarks as short as you can. You know, I mean, you don't want people to go on unless they're telling a really good story. You know, that's got. If I talk about the Bobby Knight experience, I think I can hold your attention for 10 minutes.
Okay.
You know, because that's just an unusual situation. And I'll act it out. My voice will go up and down, all that stuff. You know? Okay. But for the most part, I think that people are looking for, especially these days, you know, with the Twitters, and our attention span is lessened.
Yes and no. I mean, the podcasts, they'll typically they can run as long as 2 or 3 hours.
They can, but I don't listen to them. Maybe I'll listen to 1 or 2. I don't have to pay. Like, there's a thing called Metal. My doctor friend that keeps wanting me to do it. Saturday mornings from 9 in the morning till 11, so it's 2 hours. And you pay for, and you get 5 different speakers coming on. I don't want to sit in front of my computer unless I'm working, you know what I mean? I don't have the patience for it. I'm sure it would be fascinating. He tells me, you really should see this. Everyone, even this masters thing, for $180, you can take lessons from all these masters, Joyce Carol Oates or whatever, Annie Leibovitz, and you can see them all and you can watch them all. So I think that's a really interesting thing. I'm not geared to watch and learn that much from my computer yet. I just not.
Well, you're geared to create. You are.
I feel guilty if I'm doing that and I'm not working on the story or even just reading. There's so much reading I haven't done, and I worry about that. I worry that I won't finish Dostoevsky, or I won't even get to Tolstoy, or I won't be reading the certain Bellow that I haven't read yet. Yeah. There's a lot of stuff I haven't read, and I wish I was. But, when it comes to the 7 minutes or the Ira Glass 45 seconds, I think Ira Glass is right with 45 seconds. David Issei does something else. He does the story core. So David Issei is doing something that he wants, people to tell their stories, basically. I'll give you one example. Okay. I interviewed Alex Haley. Alex Haley and I had a lot in common because he was a Playboy interviewer. He did Miles Davis. He did George Lincoln Rockwell. He did Muhammad Ali. He did Malcolm X. And we're exchanging stories. Tell me about the best interview you did, the worst, the most. All that stuff I could relate to. We could have a great conversation, and we did. But when I watched what we did, Alex Haley was a storyteller. Every one of those stories was more than 6 minutes long. And I was doing a Playboy cable TV interview that was edited down to 10 minutes. It was like a 60-minute thing. I had an introduction and then a 10. I could not use any of the stories he told. Yeah. I had to find the little bits and pieces that were a minute long or 2 minutes long. It was like, wow, it's so much better than what I showed.
That's a problem with the medium, not necessarily with him.
No, I don't blame him at all. I blame me. I blame me for that. I blame me for not being more aware of what I was doing as a TV thing. Yeah. I ended up putting that interview in the book, in Endangered Species. I believe Alex Haley is in there. So you can get to see the longer stories. It's all there in print. Yeah. But you don't see it if I showed you the video. It's a nice video, by the way, but it's it's nowhere near the in-depth it could have been or was. So it's just a matter of the medium being the message in a sense, and which one, what you're using it for, and how much you want to get across. And do you want to show a personality, or do you want to show something intellectual or something entertaining? That's really the choices you have to make when you're dealing with time. I've never dealt with time on my major interviews, so I've been lucky that way.
Let's move on to relationships. You quote Roy Firestone with ESPN. You admire the work that he did, and he always went for an emotional center, and he often focused on the family. Now, there's a very, very good author-interviewer in Canada, Eleanor Wachtel, and she invariably goes to the family. Again, I suppose it's about revealing the character of someone that the listener is really interested in because they've created stuff that they love. How do you see this?
I think what you just said is that the reason a person is listening to something or reading something is because they're interested in that person.
Yeah.
Or getting to know that person, or because they already know that person and they want to go more with it. So there's an interest there. James Gardner told me that when his father remarried this woman, she was a real terrible woman. And she made him dress up when he did something wrong in a dress. And she called him by a woman's name and made him go to the market or something like that. It got to a point where he got so angry with her that he attacked her. He grabbed her by the throat, he threw her down on the bed, and he was choking her. His father came running in, grabbed him off, and whatever. Father eventually divorced the woman. To you, that may not be an interesting thing, because how did that affect James Gardner's Maverick, or whatever?
Yeah.
To me, that's as revealing as anything I can give you. And I find it fascinating that this man who came from this background managed to overcome whatever he did and do what he did. That's to me, those stories are. Halle Berry's father took the Maltese dog they had when it was barking, picked it up and threw it against the wall. Halle Berry tells me this story, and I sort of understand all the relationships she had with men who were terrible to her.
Yeah, but I really couldn't give a shit about her personal life. I care about how good an actress she is.
Yeah, but how did she become that actress?
Yeah, but she puts all that aside when she puts when there's a performance on the screen or stage, and that's what you appreciate. I don't care how she was molested,
those performances could not have come without her background.
Yeah, but
okay, but I'm giving you the background, and you don't want the background. That's all. Look, Elizabeth Shue, her brother was. They used to go to the swimming pool all the time, right? They swung from the rope. Her brother swung from the rope and didn't land in the water, and he got spiked and he died. Now, that's a terrible thing to happen, especially if you were there. And so, so how does that affect her? How did that happen? I asked her about that. I talked to her about that. Those are just things that give me, hopefully, the reader or the listener a little bit more insight into that person. So when they see something about her, they can go and say, oh, she overcame tragedy. She did. It's just that.
I know. It's basically, again, it's this culture where celebrity is sort of worshipped, and it's more about the person that invariably is not that interesting, but people really want to know about him.
Well, I'm very cynical about celebrity. I don't give a shit about celebrity anymore.
You've been telling me throughout this whole interview about all these different celebrities that you've
had. Yes, because those are the people I've interviewed. Those are the people that made me famous in a way. One of the things about my book that, some people say, well, it's all about, these celebrities. But what about interviewing normal people? My feeling is normal people, so quote in quotes, are just as interesting, and you can apply the same techniques I'm talking about, but it just happened to be, my experience was interviewing these people.
Yeah.
When I started doing Newsday, I had no choice. They say, we want to do interviews with household names.
Well, and it also makes your heart tick a bit faster when you go and see someone who's like Robert De Niro or Al Pacino. I mean, and when you tell the story, it impresses people. But these individuals probably aren't that as interesting as, say, someone who's an accomplished scientist or who doesn't have much renown, but who's got a really good brain.
Nobody's going to pay me.
Yes, exactly. You're right. You're right.
Living, I got paid $10,000 an interview for Playboy.
Wow. Okay, that's good. We're not supposed to. I didn't think we were supposed to talk about money, Larry.
Oh no, you have to talk about money. I think money's as a writer, you need to talk about. I always talk about money to my students. I tell them what I made. I tell them exactly. I tell them how much I got paid for the use.
It's sad. It's sad how much you used to make and how little they make now.
Oh, I will get calls from people offering me $50 to do interviews. I said,
it's pathetic, isn't it?
And it's the mindset. I couldn't even Modern Maturity when it was Modern Maturity and not AARP. I wrote for them a few things. Never wrote as good. Why? Because they never paid me as much. You know what I mean? It was like I realized I was being paid to be a better writer.
You didn't have as much. There wasn't as much skin in the game.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, James Michener said to me once. He says, Larry, what distinguishes you and I from other people, other writers, is that everybody's a writer. We get paid for it.
Yeah.
And you never forget that. When I asked Michener to write the introduction to the Capote, now Michener gave away $60 million of his art collection. He was a very wealthy man. I paid him, I think, $500 or $1,000 or $15. I don't remember what it was for the introduction, because that's the only way to honor him. Respect him.
It's
I
respect.
paid J.P. Donlevy out of my own pocket. I got the publisher to pay for the Capote one. But Donlevy, I said I wanted Donlevy because Donlevy was one of my favorite writers. Just the idea that he would write an introduction to me, I wanted that to exist. The publisher said, no, they don't have the budget for anything. So I said, Mike, he went by Mike. I said, I'm going to pay you. I said, would you write something? And he did. Mm-hmm. And I had to edit it because he wrote a very long piece, and I had to edit Michener too because they kept going off topic as I do.
I figured the reason that you are able to connect with these people is because you know them in many cases just as well as they know themselves. Is that true?
Yes. No, I think so. At least for that moment, I remind them of things they forgot. But, that's true. I mean, when you start researching somebody, and especially the way I did it, I would go to the Academy library. I would read every clip that they had of anybody I was talking to.
Yeah. Well, especially as you could afford to do that because you were getting paid really well to do it.
Exactly. Yeah. Even look, Barbra Streisand, I spent 9 months. I didn't get a dime from them. I never got my money up front. I never, I just did it because at that point in my career, I just wanted to do a Playboy interview. I wanted to get into Playboy.
Did it on spec.
And then I got graduated to 6 or 7. Then it became 10. That was the most. Entertainment Weekly, when they were starting out, they wanted to get Al Pacino for the cover for Godfather 3. Everybody wanted it. Esquire wanted it. Playboy wanted it. The guy who called me up, and he says to me, and you get us Pacino. I said, well, what are you paying? He says, we'll give you $17,000.
See, Pacino knew that the access that you had to him put money in your pocket.
Yes. But what the best part was, the Entertainment Weekly came back and said, if he'll do the cover, we'll give you $4,000 more. Well, the only reason he would do it is for the cover, right? He don't care about the article. So that's $21,000. That's the most I ever made for an article, for me. What I'm saying is that, it's what can you do? Once you stop making money, you say I can support my kids. I can put my kids through college and medical school. I can buy a house by working diligently. And Rolling Stone paid $3 a word. I would do a 3,000 word article for Rolling Stone. I'd get $9,000.
Right.
I still had to write 16 or 20 articles a year to make 6 figures.
That's a lot of work.
It's a miracle, that I survived.
Yeah.
That I was able to do what I did. The books, they never paid that much. The Houstons, I got paid $215,000 to write that book. But I spent 3 years writing that book. So now I'm making $70,000 a year. Plus, I had to travel. I had to go to England. I had to go to Paris.
And you had to pay for all that.
No, that was part of the $250. They paid me $175, and then they gave me an extra $30
for traveling.
So it's $215 total.
Right.
But out of that, I had to do what I did and write a book. It's not an easy.
It's not easy. No.
But it's possible. I don't know if it's possible anymore.
No,
I don't know if you can be an interviewer doing what I did anymore. I don't know anybody's paying anything.
I can tell you right now, it's not. You do it out of the love of doing it. Really but it's just gravy to get paid for it.
Absolutely. I mean, when you do this now, you have a podcast. So the only way you get paid is from the advertising, right? That people might advertise on your podcast?
Yeah, theoretically, yeah.
Do you get publishers to advertise books?
No, I don't want to do any of that. I'm living off my investments and my savings. But this is basically the second half of my life. This is what I want to do with it. Yeah, I worry a bit about money,
So we're
but
doing the same thing. No, I'm the same way. I'm just feeling I'm writing what I want to write. If somebody wants to publish it, if someone wants, if a screenplay happens, I have had a few. That'll be great.
Yeah.
I'd love to make some money on it, but
yeah.
I can survive without it, and I'd rather do what I'm doing.
Yeah.
That's why I haven't done the podcast, because I've been asked by a few people to do these podcasts. I just say, well, it's going to take to do what Mark Maron is doing. I could do it, but it would take me probably 2 or 3 or 4 years to get an audience like that, to get the advertising to make it worthwhile. Do I have those years of my life left, or do I have 1 or 2 more novels I want to write, or a book of short stories I want to write? I'm opting for the selfish way.
Good for you. I mean, really, you've only got a certain amount of time left on Earth, and what do you want to leave behind?
Exactly. I look at the books. I have 28 books out there that you can actually hold, and I said that's nice. I'm going to make grandchildren. But, I'm also worried about some of the things I've written. I have a granddaughter. A lot of the stuff I wrote is very sexist. But why? Because I wasn't a member of the Me Too generation. I was a member of the 1960s and 50s growing up and, trying to trap a girl when I was 15 years old. All you do is think about getting laid.
That's the honest truth.
Yeah, I was very honest about it. But there's a couple of scenes in the memoir that I thought of me, my little granddaughter, who's 5 years old right now. I thought 15, 20 years from now, when I'm gone, she's going to read about her grandpa. How is she going to think of me? I changed some of those sections. I went back and I said I want to rewrite it in a certain way, and I did. I feel bad that I did, but on the other hand, I also feel sensitive to the movements that are going on today, even though I was never a part of those movements until now. I was
wondering and thinking about whether or not I would bring this up, but I think you might advise that I do. So on page 359 of The Art of the Interview, you say, but, and I think this is when you're questioning yourself. You've got an interview in there where you are both the interviewer and the interviewee, and you say, but I've been known to bring up sexual dalliance. This is about lying. But I've been known to bring up sexual dalliances in my past that I might make sound as if they happened just the other day. In other words, you've had sexual dalliances in your marriage. That's putting it out there.
Yeah, even though I haven't. I mean, the fact is that...
Okay, wait a minute here. Let me just focus on that again. What you're saying is that you have had them, but you bring them up to date. You bring them up as if you've just had them, as opposed to them being in the distant past.
No, well, what I'm saying is that in the very distant past. In other words, the sexual dalliances that, I'm married. I've been married since 1978, let's say. So I may be talking about something that, I did this too, But the fact is, I may have done that in 1972, before I was married or anything.
Doesn't read that way, Larry.
Yeah, well, that's the way I was really meaning it, in a way that thankfully I've been faithful to my wife and whatever, but,
she's
what
Japanese.
I'm saying is that if I'm interviewing somebody who's telling me about they're not being faithful to their wives, I might say I haven't been faithful to mine to get you to talk about the fact that you haven't been faithful to yours. Because in the end, I'm only using what you have to say, not what I have to say. I'm editing, so that's where I would go with that. Sometimes.
So you're lying. You're lying to them.
I might lie to them. I might stretch the truth. Not necessarily. I mean,
I wouldn't do that.
Well, Robert Scheer, do you know who he is? Bob Scheer?
Yes, yeah.
Well, he was once quoted on the cover of Writer's Digest saying, I would sleep with my grandmother, I would lie, I would do this, I'd do anything possible to get the quote.
Right.
He got the famous quote from Jimmy Carter about lust in my heart.
Yeah. Playboy.
They came out as they were walking out of the door. So it was not even part of the interview, but the tape was still on.
Right.
Just guys talking. When he said that, I would lie, cheat. I don't do it either. I mean, I'm saying it now to you that I may have lied. Yes, maybe. But I would say, if you ask me a percentage of the times I have not told the truth, I'd say it's 1%, 2%. If I fabricate something, or elaborate something, I've had some pretty amazing stories in my life. That's what that memoir is all about.
For sure you have. That's what's making this. That's what's making this interview interesting.
No, I lost you.
I've got another question for you.
Okay.
You much prefer, as I do, to interview people alone, just you and them, and quiet.
Right.
Yeah, it's a much better vibe. I think you can connect much better. It also brings up the question of publicists, and you deal a bit with publicists, and what a pain in the ass they can be.
Yeah, I have a real love-hate with publicists. For the most part, hate, but there's nothing you can do about it. You know, when I did Jake Gyllenhaal, I get there and there's a New York Times reporter before me. There's another reporter.
Yeah,
it's like boom, boom, boom.
Yeah, it's like they don't. There's no respect, and they don't really give a shit about you've got 20 minutes or you got half an hour. It's like, personally, if that's what the author's publicist says to me, I say, I'm not interested. I don't want to do that. I want at least an hour.
Right. No, I agree with you. And I mean, right now, writers have to be thankful anybody wants to talk to them. You know what I mean? So I can't imagine too many writers saying no. I mean, John Updike turned me down, and Tom Wolfe. I had to go for those two, and I really wanted them, and I couldn't get them.
It's too bad about Wolfe.
Well, yeah, Updike had a stutter. So I just think that what happened with Updike was he didn't want that on tape. He didn't want to get, and I understood that. But I met him because we corresponded 3 or 4 times, and he kept saying no to me. So finally, when he was at the library doing a reading of something in downtown L.A., so I went in, I waited online to get him to sign a book, whatever, and I said, Mr. Updike, I said, you and I have been writing to each other. I said, I've been trying to get you to do this interview, and you won't do it. And he looked at me, he says, yeah. I said, I did Sol Bello. And he said to me, yes, I know, I read it. That's all. He read it, and he didn't want to do that. He didn't want to go.
Yeah.
He knew what was in there. So I respected that.
Yeah.
Laurence Olivier kept turning me down also. I have 4 letters that are framed from Laurence Olivier, all of them saying, not now, not now, not now, whatever. So I never did it with him,
Yeah.
And DeLillo, you couldn't get to DeLillo, Cormac McCarthy. There are certain writers that just don't want to talk. Pynchon, he would be the catch of the century if you couldn't get Salinger. But, you're not going to get him.
I have what I call the bibliophile reference library.
Okay.
So what I've done is I've got about 400 or 500 publishers' histories, and I also collect all sorts of memoirs from authors, editors, book designers, printers, collectors, booksellers, you name it, so that I can reference these books when I interview all these different types of people. And you have something similar going, or had.
You mean all the things I have in my archives?
No, I mean that you had quite a library that you were able to call upon.
Yeah, in my office right here, I have 10 or 12, 15 shelves, just looking at them, in these bookcases that are floor to ceiling. And in every one of those shelves are books that are stacked this way and then piled up this way. And they all have to do with the work I would do. So they're mostly entertainment books, or they're books about, celebrities or writers or authors, whatever it is, people's biographies. So that's all right in my hands.
Yeah.
I would prefer that than going online or looking and whatever. That's the way I am. Downstairs in my house, I just recently have been cataloging all the signed first editions I have. I have some amazing books signed by Truman Capote and Norman Mailer.
Yeah.
I have 135 books by Joyce Carol Oates. Every one of them is signed to me. Every one, including all our poetry. Same thing with J.P. Donlevy, or some of the writers I have. Michener, I have every one of his books. I have 80 or 90 books, all signed and with his stamp on it. So they're valuable to me anyway. And I know, but I have Joseph Heller, Catch-22. So I realize now, or my wife realizes that she's ready to leave me during the pandemic if I don't get rid of all the shit in the house. What are we going to do? Leave this to the kids? They don't want it.
I can relate. Yeah, I think every bibliophile can relate.
Right. So I've been cataloging all the signed books that are inscribed and stuff, and I thought I had about 300 Turns out I have 965 first editions in really prim condition, signed late. I have another 2,000.
So what are you going to do with them?
Well, I just contacted someone I knew from UCLA Special Edition Collections Library. She's no longer there, but she knew somebody, a guy who deals with this kind of stuff, and maybe the library. The books won't go to the Library of Congress. But my tapes. I have thousands and thousands of tapes. I have 52 hours with Barbra Streisand, 100 hours with John Huston. I have Michener, 100 hours. What do you do with all these tapes you have? I sold one tape on Bonhams. They did an auction.
Yeah.
And they wanted my book, Surely You're Joking, Mr. Fineman, Richard Fineman, who won the Nobel Prize in Quantum Physics. Huge following. One of the great geniuses. Him and Stephen Hawking would have been, I guess, the two greatest geniuses of our time. And Fineman has died. So Fineman, the woman wanted to put up the book at auction. I said, well, it's not even a first edition, but he had signed it. He never signs books. I had dinner with him once. But at that dinner, he told me a story. He told me an amazing story about how he bumped his head going to get a computer and that his brain was leaking. The pressure on his brain was causing him to be a very bad teacher rather than a good teacher, and causing him to forget where he was and whatever. And finally, he went to the doctor. They drilled 2 holes in his brain was back to normal again. So it was a great story.
Yeah.
I ended up writing it for the LA Times magazine. It was a cover story. And it was also the time that he was on the shuttle, when the shuttle exploded. And he was on the committee to figure out how the shuttle exploded. And he was the only one who figured it out. The O-ring, that was Feynman. But at the time I was seeing him, he hadn't figured it out yet. He was on the committee, but he couldn't talk about it, right? And as soon as I finished the article, about a week later, he comes out with that. So I had to go back into the article and all. But anyway, I had this tape with him. So I said, how about, when we auction it, we'll throw in the tape. And we did. And it sold for 7 times more than the price that they thought they were going to get for it. It sold into, the mid-5 figures.
Mid-5 figures?
It was pretty amazing to me. So I realized that from that, I got Saul Bellow, I got Mailer, I got Capote on tape. I mean, but there's not just regular conversations. These are the most in-depth things they've ever done.
Yeah.
And I have all that stuff. So it's got to be valuable.
That's gold, yeah.
So I think what I have to do is have someone like this guy take it to the Library of Congress, take it to the University of Texas.
I've got just the man for you. I won't say his name on this interview, but I'll give it to you afterwards.
Good.
I just want to quickly hit a few extra highlights about interviewing that you've put in the book, because there's so much that you've put in. Be a chameleon, be a good listener, don't be afraid to speak up, ask very direct questions without alienating your guest, of course. Seduce, perform, flirt, be confident, tease, coax, goad. It's all good stuff. And here's the best one.
Yeah.
It's important to establish early on that you're not a schmuck. Is that from Joel Siegel by any chance, or is that me? That's you.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure that's you. It might be someone else, but I think it's you.
I know Joel Siegel was a friend of mine too, and he was great on TV. He passed away. I'm just wondering, that sounded like something he would have said too. But yes, it's this is the whole thing. It's like when you come in. That's why I always feel the most important part of an interview is the first minute you walk in the door, the first moment you make eye contact.
Yeah.
When I saw Warren Beatty, I was dressed in an African fugu. I lived in Africa for 3 years in the Peace Corps in Ghana. So I had a lot of that clothing, and I felt comfortable in that clothing. It wasn't like an act. I liked wearing those stuff.
Yeah.
But I knew if I wear it to an interview, I'm going to be looked at differently.
Yeah.
And I just said certain people I would figure out that way. Sometimes I saw Louise Lasser was jailed for marijuana. She was Mary Hartman, very big television show at the time. So when she got out of jail, I was going to interview her. So I go to and I'm just very casually. But she says, the guy before me was coming out, he was wearing a suit and a tie. He was from the Wall Street Journal. And I could see that it was a very uptight type of interview. When I came in, she saw me and she got more relaxed in a certain way. And she said to me, "Do you have a joint?"
Right.
And I looked at her, I said, "Well," I said, I always would carry one just in case anybody asked. But I said, but I don't know, how good it is. She says, "Is it any good?" And I said, "Well, I don't know your capacity." She says, "Well, then we better use mine." She says, "But I'm on parole," she says, "and if you write about this, I will kill you." She told me. So I said, "Okay." So we smoked a little bit and we walked on the beach. Now, that to me was like amazing that she believed that I wouldn't write about it, that she could trust me to even bring it up. You just don't know. So I always feel I want to make people very comfortable, and I will go anywhere.
We touched on the fact that it's about rapport, and you sure got a nice rapport with her early on.
Yeah, and that was the idea. Well, the thing is, but with Elliot too. Yeah, so he said he wanted to try Coke. I had never done it, but I figured, I'll do it once. What the heck? So I said, okay. Well, I don't know what it was laced with. I don't know what it was. I've never done it again. But what happened is that my teeth clenched. We went up to his bedroom to talk because there were people around.
Yeah.
And we're in his bedroom, and I'm like this, and I cannot get my words out. And I actually went in the bathroom to pry my teeth open. Elliot was very cool about it. He just gave me a charm. And he says, "Here, suck on this," so I get it wrong, huh? But, I mean, it was like, God, the things one will do. I was willing to jump out of an airplane for an interview. I would not do that for anything else. But, I mean, not for an interview, for an article. But that's what writing to me has always been. I have never done acid. I don't know about you, but I've never done it.
No, I don't want to screw up my brain.
Well, that's what Linus Pauling said to me.
Yeah.
When I asked him about, I said, a lot of scientists might be curious. I mean, you look at Coleridge and Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner.
Yeah.
A lot of these people took drugs. A lot of them went, Ken Kesey. They went places to see how far they could go.
Yeah.
And Pauling said, I've been given a gift. My brain is my gift, he says, and I don't know what it would do to me. Maybe it would make me think better, but maybe it wouldn't, and I don't want to take the chance. Now, I don't have his brain, but I still don't want to do acid. I'm still afraid of that one.
Yeah, me too. We're just about to wind off here. I want to just, first of all, comment that you don't talk much about what the author wants, which in large part is to get readers to buy their books. You cover beautifully what the interviewer should be doing, but you also need to keep in mind that...
You do, I don't. I mean, have I been selling my books to you? I got 28 books. Have I mentioned the names of my novels? Or I held up 1 or 2 books, but I don't do that. I would like you to ask me about my books, and I'll talk about them, but I don't... that's my problem, is I don't sell myself.
But I'm talking about the book, The Art of the Interview. You focus, obviously, on the interviewer as opposed to why the interviewee is talking to you in the first place. Of course, they want to get publicity and exposure, but they also want to, in the case of authors, they want to sell books.
Yes, well, to tell you the truth, I never think about what they want. I know what they want. I mean, yes, obviously they really want to talk about it, but I don't think that for me to write about that. I don't know what you just said it all right there. The authors want to sell their work, so that's why they're doing it. Yeah. But that's not why they did it for the Playboy interview. The Playboy interview was a different animal. So it wasn't there to promote necessarily. It didn't come out necessarily when someone had a movie coming out. Sometimes it did. That's how De Niro was pressured into it because the movie he was making. The company pressured him into doing the interview. But for the most part, the interviews I did weren't necessarily tied to a movie.
No.
I did Patty Hearst, and she had a book. I guess it was coming out or it came out. I don't remember. But, it was like the idea was to get to Patty Hearst. No one got to her. She's coming out of jail. It's an amazing interview to have, but there's so much to talk about, the whole history of that thing. The interviews I did, I always looked at as history. Yeah. That's what Ariana did, interviews with history. I always thought of it as like the cultural history of the United States, basically, some foreigners, from the 70s until today. If you look at Endangered Species, for instance, you mentioned that, the book, I'm very proud of that book. No, you can't even get it anymore. You probably get it for $1 if you can find it online, but because it's not been reprinted. But it's a lasting book because it's about these people's lives, and they talk about them, themselves. And it's Neil Simon and Andrew Greeley, as well as Saul Bellow and Norman Mailer, and so it's an interesting collection of writers. Writers are my heroes. They're the ones that when you talk about getting excited about seeing somebody, yeah, Marlon Brando made me, in a lot of ways. Barbra Streisand and those two interviews made my reputation. There's no doubt about it. Yeah. But the ones you asked me if I would go back to see anybody. I'd like to see Capote again. I'd like to go back to see Mailer. I loved being around him. They were smart people. And when you saw it, even on TV, the interview I did with Mailer on TV, when I had the transcript done, it was in perfect sentences. There weren't stutters. There weren't repetitions. It was amazing to see how his mind worked beautifully transcribed. I didn't have to futz around with too much. I just took the areas I liked, but it was all there. Whereas when you talk to Al Pacino or Robert De Niro or whatever, it's like, he said one sentence about his mother on page 22, and 5 days later on page 60, another sentence, and then another sentence, and I would take those three and I put them together. They make him look articulate. That's what De Niro said to me, is you made me smarter than I thought I was.
Yeah, I mean, interviewing authors, and you do reference this in the book, authors have stories to tell, and they know how to tell them. And they're typically interesting people, and that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. I want to connect with really smart, interesting people. So, but enough about me. Let's end here with Aristotle again, who says, as I promised, to know yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. And I know you've got a book that basically outlined all the lessons that you've learned as a result of all these fascinating connections that you've... So here's a chance to plug that book.
Well, Polonius did say in Hamlet, to thine own self be true, right?
Yeah.
Basically, that's it. The bottom line for all of this is know yourself, be true to yourself, try, and especially as an interviewer, be who you are. You can't fake it. I knew when I saw Marlon Brando, when I was going there, I said, he's got the best shit detector of all. He's the best actor of all, so he would have that. So if I started to, tell him a story that I'm making up or something, he'll catch me. So I got to be, I've got to be as honest as I can. I got to be who I am.
But you need you need to plug the book, Larry, right now.
Yeah, well, you're talking to me. It's a book that basically says that I've interviewed all these artists, athletes, celebrities over 5 decades. The memoir I wrote called You Show Me Yours described how I was the Mozart of interviewers, basically, by Joyce Carol. You Talking to Me details what I've learned from talking to some of the most fascinating people of our time. So it includes Cameron Diaz and James Spader, J.P. Donlevy and George C. Scott, Patty Hearst and Mel Gibson, Nicole Kidman, James Carey, Miles Davis, Meryl Streep, Jeff Bridges, Mailer, Leonard Oates, Paul McCarthy, Hugh Hefner, Elliot Gould, Charlie Sheen, Jesse Ventura, Barbra Streisand, 120 different people.
You are one fascinating person, and so thank you very much for a very entertaining, at least for me, interview. It's been a great pleasure. Larry, you have a website, so we'll just plug that. It's is it lawrencegrobel.com?
Yes, LAWRENCEGROBEL.com. It's got all the books I have listed on the front page, but also I've blogged a lot of stuff. I have photographs of me with all these celebrities on a gallery, and then there's another section that has all the books I've published, almost all anyway. I haven't updated some of it, but all the foreign editions. So you see the Pacino books are published in 14 countries.
Great.
And so you get to see the different covers people come up with.
Yeah.
The Capote one is really fascinating. The German one shows Capote on the cover dancing with Marilyn Monroe.
I've got to read the Capote Conversations with Capote. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that book will last as long as anything I've ever done. I don't know why, but it's just like people love that book. You know?
But, very good. Well, thank you so much again.
Thank you, Nigel.